Hi there. Thank you. Welcome to Concord Art and True Stories Told Live, Stories from the Classroom. Just in case you were wondering if you're in the right place. My name is Kate James, and I am the Executive Director here at Concord Art. We are grateful to David Garrett, who we share this evening, fifth time. Is it 5? I think 4 years, 5 times. And we're really grateful to him for starting us off and for continuing this collaboration. We realize that we're a visual arts center, not visual arts, but we've decided that storytelling is very much like visual art. Visual art is storytelling. So here you are tonight. Tonight we are in person with a limited capacity for in person and as well as online with the help of Minuteman Media. Thank you. I'd like to thank our Concord Art Events Committee and our Programs and Communications Manager, Marissa Cote, for making it possible tonight. So they've asked me to plug a few things, so here I go. The 22 calendar is available. And it's the theme, it's our centennial calendar, 2022. We will be 100 years old, which is pretty amazing. We're very proud of that, and I think we've loved being in the town of Concord for 100 years. That's pretty amazing, right? So the calendar is available to buy, and while you're at it, you can also buy some chances to win art classes, art tours, and more downstairs with Natalie. Also, please join us for our annual 5x7 postcard show, which I think a lot of you have been to before. We usually have it in the spring, but we're having it during the gift giving season this year. And we'll have hundreds of original pieces of artwork. The opening will be December 2nd. And it's really fun. They're only $40 each, and they're beautiful gifts. So this current exhibition is our faculty show. This is the first time we've ever had a faculty show. There are 50 of our teachers are in the show. And we did this to honor them because the last 2 years have been pretty incredible for all teachers. And they haven't missed a beat. They've gone online. Our students love it. And we're really proud of it. And so tonight we're honoring teachers everywhere, not just at Concord Art. And so that's why we're having stories from the classroom. So the theme of tonight's show, well, I think teachers are an integral part of everybody's life. I don't care who you are, whether you teach or whether you're a student. And I know in my own experience that the two teachers that shaped my life were both named Barbara. Barbara Novak was my art history teacher in college. And there's another person here tonight who also shared the Barbara from high school. And Barbara O'Brien, and both of them were amazing. And I just want every teacher in the world to know how important you are to so many students that you've taught. Anyway, we are going to kick off the evening with David Garrett, who will introduce and be our MC tonight. So I'll see you later. Thank you.
So I heard a rumor that if you've only been in Concord 100 years, you're a newbie. My name is David Garrett. I run Fugitive Productions for the last 5 or 6 years. I've been hosting storytelling here and in many other places. I do live music events and comedy events. If you would like to visit the fugitiveproductions.com website, you'll see all the stuff. It's all local. Everything, most of the stuff I do now is in Maynard in a converted church at Sanctuary. It's a gorgeous room. And it's a vaccination-only room as well. So check that out. I wanted to thank Concord Art specifically for helping to keep the art of in-person storytelling alive. So you gave me a great lead in there. Thank you. And I wanted to do a special hello for those of you, hello, at home watching. I'd also like to dedicate this evening to my friend Sid, who is listening, who is recovering from a surgery that I'm happy to report went surprisingly well. So I just wanted to say, hey, Sid. Let me just tell you how this works for those of you who are new to this. If you've heard The Moth on NPR, this will be similar. This will be familiar to you. And some of you I know I recognize because you've been here before. What we do is tell a 5 to 7 minute story on a theme. You know the theme tonight is in the classroom. We try to make the categories broad so that we get a real variety of stories. We hope to hear stories that are gleeful and sad and emotionally challenging and, you know, the whole range of sort of experience. And I know that a couple of the folks here tonight have already shared their stories with me. And I found myself being moved and remembering my own personal stories by hearing those stories. And that's why we do this. The two best stories to my mind are ones that take us to a place we've never been. And we go, wow, that has brought me this place of human experience that I've never had. And you get for a few minutes to feel that. And the other kind is the one where, yeah, been there, done that. That feels so familiar to me. There's something in there. And that I can really relate to that story. And that's why we do this and why it's even a mystery to me for the most part as to what stories people are going to tell tonight, because part of it is just the whole experience of hearing one after another after another. And, you know, at the end of the night, our hearts are always full. I'm hosting tonight mainly because I get to take my mask off every now and then. But it is time to move on with the show. Now, the beginning of the show tonight, we have 4 people that Concord Art has identified, people who are close to the community, who offered to tell a story and a theme. And I've had conversations with each of them, and they've prepared a story. Now, many of them are public speakers, have done lots of public speaking in their lives, but have never done this particular brand of speaking. So, you know, maybe a little nerves. So we are going to be the best audience, and we're going to support them and cheer them on and, you know, just shine light on them as they speak. Our first teller, and by the way, this might be my favorite intro ever. They send me these intros, and I want to say this is magnificent. Our first teller is inspired by his wife and 2 daughters. The major elements of his essence are defined throughout this lens. The rest is merely semantics. Please welcome Rob Munro.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, David. Thank you, Concord Art. Prologue. I am an African-American male who was transracially adopted and grew up in exclusively white communities. I married the love of my life, my best friend, who is an art historian and who is solely responsible for my love of and passion for art. Chapter 1, a classroom. Back in 2017, I was a history teacher, and for the purposes of this story, I was teaching US history, a survey course, to a number of high schoolers, brilliant kids, dynamic, fascinating, compassionate, all of those good things. We had just focused in on a unit on the civil rights, my bread and butter, right? And the framework I use for the civil rights is critical and difficult conversations. Let's dig into the mess. Let's ask really tough questions, and let's ask a lot of one another. It's hard stuff. There's fear, there's some anger, right? There's all the emotions you might imagine when you talk about the civil rights movement. What I was focused on recently was what was the genesis of the civil rights movement, specifically in the 40s and 50s, right? Any number of answers could come to mind. We focused in on Emmett Till, more specifically, the death of Emmett Till. Chapter 2, Emmett Till. Emmett Till in 1955 was a 14-year-old boy, African American, hadn't lost his baby fat yet, so he had that really nice, cute face. Bright, funny, and incredibly capable. He lived in Chicago with his mother, and his mother had relatives down in Mississippi, which in 1955 was a terrifying place for a young boy of color. Yeah, so despite that, his mom said, you need to go and spend some time with your relations. Go down, see your uncle and his family, all right? And I'll see you in August. So he went, and he spent a really enjoyable summer down with his uncle and his cousins, and they did what 14-year-old kids do. They play outside, they cause mischief, they go to the store, buy penny candy and other trinkets and things like that. Nothing out of the ordinary. On one morning, he went to the store, picked up some candy or something like that with his cousins, and depending on one's perspective, he either left the store or he whistled at the woman who was the clerk behind the desk. Whichever interpretation there was, whatever our perspective is, what we do know is that that woman's husband and her half-brother visited Emmett Till that night at his uncle's house, woke them up, asked to speak to Emmett Till politely outside. They took him outside. They beat him up. They shot him. They mutilated his body. They dragged it. And then they buried it in the water. They tied a rock to his legs, threw him in the water. Some days later, after his body emerged, bloated, mutilated, unrecognizable, they were able to send the body back to Chicago as it was. His mother, who was one of the bravest human beings I've ever studied in my life, decided that this should never happen again to anybody, to anyone's child. So she made his funeral public, televised. Jet Magazine was there, and he had an open casket. She decided not to put makeup and to dress up his body, but instead show his body as it was mutilated, as it was lynched, bloated face, unrecognizable facial features. People were able to see his body and cry and faint. It was a really terrifying experience. Chapter 3. Dana Schutz. Dana Schutz is an artist. She's a very prolific artist. Many of you guys might know of her. In 2017, at the Whitney Biennial, she was invited to exhibit her work. She chose a provocative piece called Open Casket, which represented an abstract version of the very photo of Emmett Till's bloated, mutilated body from his casket. As you can imagine, this piece evoked fear, anger, love, conversation. A lot of people demonstrated and protested against this piece. They wrote letters saying, you need to take this piece down. She should not be compensated for this. She should not be able to make a profit on this. The Whitney didn't relent. They kept the piece. Footnote 1, Dana Schutz is a white identifying female artist. Chapter 3, my classroom. I decided to start my day in the spring of 2017 showing Dana Schutz's piece. That was going to be the topic of our conversation that day. And I was going to open up the floor. Should Dana Schutz have painted this piece? Should she have presented it at the biennial? Should she have been compensated for this piece to make a profit? As a white woman, should she have done this? And I opened it up, and the kids grabbed at it. They were compassionate. They were energetic. There was fear. There were moments of being aghast. It was an incredibly dynamic 35 minutes. Amidst all of this conversation, things were going well. Thinking to myself, Rob, you nailed it. It's a good day for you. You got this. 1 second. Madeline, what do you got? Dr. Munro, what do you think? In a situation like this, teachers fall back on a number of things they teach us in teacher school. Take the question and throw a question right back out. Talk around the question until they get bored of hearing you talk. Or say the humble approach. I'll research this later, I'll get back to you. I said none of those things. I sat there and I thought, and I looked at myself and I looked at my students and I cried. I didn't know what else to do. My identity intersected with my profession, intersected with my presence in front of children. It intersected with this piece of art that I had not spent time to process before giving it to my students. That was a big mistake because it hit me like a ton of bricks. I didn't know what to say. And so I did the only thing I thought I could do in that moment was I sat with it. And I cried quietly in front of 16 students. And I said, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know. The bell rang. The students left. I did not. And I sat there, tried to collect myself, tried to figure out what the heck am I supposed to do next. Do I send an email to the students? Do I let this slide? Are they going to tell their parents? Or are they going to tell my boss? Right? I didn't know. Epilogue. 5 minutes went by and I realized somebody was still in the classroom. Kids had gone, but somebody was still there. I had forgotten that day we had a history candidate at the school. She was observing my class. She was deciding, is this a place that I want to work? I had completely forgotten she was there. She came up to me. She gave me a hug. She told me, I don't know either. I cried again. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I felt affirmed. I embraced the hug. She left. A week later, I got an email. We offered her the position. She accepted the position. That's it. Thank you.
Our next teller comes from a bloodline of loud and unabashed Italian weavers of embellished true stories. For this, she has won no awards or fame, except in the cozy confines of her 7th grade English classroom, where she likes to think 12-year-olds find her remembrances of middle school of the 70s and true tales of suburban life in the new millennium strange, surprising, and even amusing. She is here in hopes that her preteen wit translates into something entertaining for adults as well. Please welcome Alyssa Bigay.
When I was in 7th grade, I wasn't cool or interesting or unique in any way whatsoever. I was a follower in terms of the music I liked, the boys I crushed on, but especially what I wore. Super tight Sassoon jeans, bright pink and Kelly green grosgrain ribbon that I ironed and then wove into my French braided hair. A comb with the perfect size handle to stick out just enough in my back pocket. I was a tiny waif of a girl with straight, thin, dull brown hair and a brain for math and Latin. But I also knew who to emulate to keep me safe and invisible in the halls of Robert E. Bell School 5 days a week. And in the spring of my 7th grade year, what I wanted, what I needed, was a pair of wallabies. If you grew up in the 70s or 80s, maybe you know them. They have a crepe sole. They're the most indistinguishable color of tan, but there's just one perfect color, and I needed them. And so my mother drove me downtown to the only shoe store around us. And in my memory, we walked in to a giant display of wallabies in the middle of the store with a bright blue and white lit up sign and a shoe salesman in a suit standing next to them, waiting for me. He took me over to the leather couch, slipped my heel into the metal measuring device, and I started to think I knew what I was going to wear tomorrow. He tapped my toe, winked at me, walked back to the stockroom, and I could imagine walking onto the bus. Maybe that crepe sole was going to give me an extra inch. Maybe that smell of suede would mix with my love's baby soft cologne, my perfect peasant blouse over my darkest Lee jeans. It was going to be amazing. And I was going to be just like everyone else. But when he came back out, the shoes he had in his hand weren't the ones on the display. They were thinner. The toe was pointy, not square. And they were dark brown, and they were hideous. And he whispered to my mother, those other ones aren't going to work for her. Her feet are too narrow. Don't waste your money. And, that was enough for her. 5 minutes later, we were out the door, the Heller's bag cinched onto my wrist. My mother didn't look at me when she said, nobody's going to notice. No one will know the difference. And I wanted to believe her. I tucked myself under my rainbow quilt that night and I said, maybe nobody will know. But they knew. And as I got on the bus the next morning, Mindy Campbell was waiting in the back of the bus. I squeaked down the aisle. You know her. Little smattering of freckles over her perfect little nose. Green eyes, long lashes, the perfect feathered hair, the right shoes. And as my grandmother would say, mean as spit. She started pointing at my feet and whispering. And suddenly I wasn't invisible anymore. The only armor that I had been blown to bits. And by the time we circled the driveway, went past the basketball courts, the jig was up and everybody knew I was a faker. That's the story I told a group of 12 and 13-year-olds last year. Because you see, I'm still in 7th grade. But 40 years later, my classroom is actually the place I feel most like myself. In there are the moments where I can finally dish with the 12-year-old popular girls and the invisible ones. It's a place I found a balance between that delicious drama of middle school, but no fear. Until last year, when everything changed. And for the first time since my first 7th grade year, I didn't want to go to school anymore. I didn't want to tell kids to pull up their masks and wipe the tables and show their faces on Zoom and not come too close. I felt like a faker again when I told them, you just need to be resilient. You just need to be flexible. Everything's okay. Everything is fine. You're safe. But I didn't feel safe. I felt like I was still on that bus in my fake shoes, like I was flying an airplane, putting on mascara, and frying an egg all at the same time. And I hate flying. It terrifies me. And this was scarier than 100 popular girls with their perfect teeth and their shiny lip gloss. And when I went home each day, I didn't know how I could come back the next morning. I didn't know how to be in this place that used to be my safe place. But being a faker actually came in handy because I started to tell them the stories of my life in a whole different way. I told them about my crappy wallabies, and they got it, and they got me. And later that spring, they told their own stories of what they put on. Their light-up sneakers from elementary school, T-shirts worn so often they're more holes than fabric, Hawaiian shirts, soccer jerseys, grandmother's lockets. Their stories were smart and funny and beautiful, but there was one that we all needed to hear more than any of the others. Emmy hadn't been in school all year because of a rare autoimmune disease, but toward the end of school, she got her vaccine and she came back in person for the last few weeks. And the day she told her story, she reached over into her backpack and pulled out a blue and red zip-up sweatshirt with white spikes along the hood. She zipped herself into it, even though it was about 2 sizes too small, tucked herself into the hood, and she told us about her diagnosis. She told us she didn't know who she was anymore, that she used to be an athlete, but now she couldn't stay out in the sun for more than 5 minutes or run the distance from her house to the bus. She told us that that sweatshirt, spiky, had become her protector, her comfort, and her armor, and that her mother told her she couldn't wear it any longer. And when that happened, she had to find her own armor again. She had to reclaim herself. And when 20 other 7th graders literally jumped out of their seats with applause, I got off the bus and forgot about the snickers of the mean girls. And I realized that 7th grade isn't all that different anymore for me or for them. Sometimes we're scared. And sometimes we're phonies. And sometimes we share just enough of ourselves that the people around us see us. Sometimes we're brave. And we didn't have to be just one of those things. We didn't have to be resilient or heroes. We just needed to step into the right shoes at the right moment. Thank you.
And that is why we love to have first-time storytellers come here, because they always bring a magnificent story, something that, you know, it's not in their back pocket. Maybe they've told it before in another context, but it's like, I don't know, that was just delicious. Thank you. Where are you? There you are. Our next teller is a retired educator and artist who lives in Maynard with his wife Elizabeth, an artist and retired art teacher. He's the director of the Witness Tree Institute of Ghana, a nonprofit educational organization that runs summer programs for American and Ghanaian teachers. The couple also has a house in Ghana where they support the School for the Blind and a small daycare center for the less privileged. They have 2 grandsons and 2 sons who are also teachers in private and public schools in Portland, Maine, and Lincoln, Massachusetts. He enjoys writing and reading poetry, plays the guitar and drums, composes music, and loves to dance. Please welcome Tete Cobblah.
Well, my name is Tete Cobblah, as you heard. I am not a professional storyteller, but I think I have a story to tell tonight. I had wanted to tell that story in one of the 5 languages that I speak, but my family tells me no one will understand. It would be a waste of time. So today I'm going to speak to you in English. I belong to an extended family. And when we say extended family in Ghana, we're talking about a lot of people. A lot of people. But today I'll talk about my nuclear family, my father and my mother, my 3 siblings, and my grandmother. I also want to talk about a space in our house where I think that the foundations of my life began, layer by layer, story by story, song by song, proverb by proverb. And I now realize that now, so I can share, this story with you with some confidence. My father was a ceramist, so he worked with clay. And I remember him always coming home with dirty hands. I thought that was awesome until something happened later. But my mother was also a teacher, an artist, but a teacher. She was head of a school in Ghana. And in the evenings, we would gather around in this space. And that was our living room. That was a very important place because we always gathered there after dinner. My father would grab his newspaper and pretend to be reading in the corner there because my grandmother was present. Grandmothers are supposed to be people, if things go right, would be in the other world sooner than all of us. And Ghanaians really respect their ancestors. So you have to be really respectful to people who are older than you. Otherwise, they'll come back and talk to you. And it was really important for us and for my parents and everyone else to send that message to us that we have to be respectful. My grandmother would sit us down. My mother would be in a corner grading her papers, and she would tell us stories. The stories were always punctuated by songs, and we sang along with her, or we responded to her prompts. And so we were part of the story. The stories always seemed to it always felt like they were there already before we entered the room. So she was just being a conduit. She was the one just calling on the story to come to us. And we felt that. In fact, sometimes we'd ask her a story and we'd say, Ma, what's going to happen to that child? And she'll say, I don't know, let's find out. So we really thought that these stories were not hers. They were actually stories that were alive and waiting for us. Well, one day something happened. I was sent to a boarding school. In Ghana, boarding schools are awesome. It's like a rite of passage. You go away for a year, your parents visit you maybe 3 times if you're lucky, and you come back, a grown person. Well, I went to a boarding school. I came back. I was 14. And my parents said, you know what? Stay for a week away from your father's studio because that's where I usually go to help. I go to help my father. I said, stay for a week, rest. You've been studying, reading all these big books. So you stay for a week without helping him. Well, that same week, a relative gave me an old guitar of his. And so I was really into this guitar. And within a short time, I had managed to come up with a few songs. I was very excited. And this attracted friends who were also on vacation. And they all came around. And that week I spent entertaining people. I was kind of a Bob Marley type person. And my siblings loved me. They respected me even more because now I was an adult and I played the guitar. One day my father came in. He had had a bad time at work. His 2 helpers had all not shown up. And he came in the afternoon for lunch and he saw me entertaining my friends. As soon as he entered, they all stood up. Good afternoon, Mr. Cobblah. And my father did not respond. Instead, he said, Don't you boys have anything to do except come around here and listen to music? Why don't you go home and help your parents? My father was a quiet man. He hardly spoke like that. I was shocked. I was embarrassed. My friends just shuffled out of the way and went home. Well, I said to myself, this is it. We are at war. My father said to me, I'm going to have lunch and I'm going to go back to the studio. I want you to join me over there. I said to myself, that's not going to happen. And so he ate, went to his studio, and I stayed behind. Evening came. My father returned from work. My mother returned. My grandmother was there. We're about to have this story time. And my father said to me, can I talk to you for a minute? And he said to me in my grandmother's room, he said, you were embarrassed today because I spoke to you that way. And you were embarrassed because of my hands, because of the dirt in my hands. I'm very disappointed. These are the hands that feed you. These are the hands that sent you to boarding school. These are the hands that will continue to feed you until you can take care of yourself. And today, you don't want to help me. And just turned and left. My grandmother said, what was that about? And I told her, I was still angry. I don't think I said it nicely. I was like, I don't know what he's talking about. For 3 days, my father just barely acknowledged me in the house. He would speak to my sisters and my brothers nicely, but he'd be like, hi, good morning, and he would be gone. So my grandmother on the third day said, we have to do something about this. If you want to say something important to someone in Ghana, you do it at dawn. And I think I can think of all kinds of reasons why you do that. They could barely lift up their heads. They'll probably not hear what you're saying. But Ghanaians believe that that's the time to say really important things to people. So my grandmother woke me up at dawn. I went into the sitting room and there was my father. Arms folded, not particularly happy. My grandmother sat down. I stood close by her and she said, I am here to talk to you about something that has happened between you and my grandson. I am here to apologize on his behalf, and he's going to apologize to you too. And quickly my grandmother went on her knees and tried to reach out to my father's foot. And he pulled his foot back quickly. And he clenched his jaws and sat there. And my grandmother said, that boy is your son. Everything that is good about him came from you. Everything that is bad came from you. Said, if you do not forgive him, you refuse to forgive yourself. And I remember feeling awful that I'd caused my grandmother to kneel. This woman that my father respected so much, I had caused her to beg on my behalf. I was scared and I started shaking. And my father said, I have heard. And he got up and left. And the following day, I was so nervous. I got up real early in the morning. I did all my chores. I did everything that had to be done. And I sat in the sitting room. My grandmother was listening through the door. My father came by, took a look at me, and walked to the door. And then he turned around and he said, Guitar boy, if you can spare some time today, join me in my studio and help me. I need your help. I couldn't talk. And my father left. And guess what? My grandmother's door opened and she said, hurry up, fall in. That day, I had a wonderful time with my father because it was just the two of us. And that day, I learned a valuable lesson. I learned about respect, what true respect is. I also learned about humility. I learned about forgiveness. But I think most importantly, what I learned that day was the depth of a grandmother's love. And I said to myself, wow, what just happened? And over the years, I have always returned to that living room. I think, and my siblings agree with me, that that room was the best classroom we ever had. I can still hear my grandmother's voice. I can hear the song that she sang so often. She would say, the past has something to say. I have heard of a land where the hawk and the hen feed their chicks together. I've heard of a place where the lion and the deer walk in peace. I have heard of a place where the blind lead a people to safety. I have heard these things with my ears, but now I hear them with my heart. Thank you very much.
I had the good grace of having lived in West Africa for 3 years. And I would say that while you say you're not a storyteller, everyone I met was a storyteller. So our next teller, even though she still thinks of herself as a student, she is a professor at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. She feels best when there is too much going on, as long as she can complain about it. She has launched businesses, international artist residencies, and anti-racism curriculum. She's the mom of 2 teenagers and the wife of a Sicilian olive oil producer. Lucha, the family dog, is the only one that can get her to relax. Please welcome Nita Storial.
At 17, I was a rebellious teenager in a small town in northwestern Pennsylvania. It was a town where the hills were filled with oil derricks that pumped up and down day and night, and where the guys let their beards grow during hunting season until they killed their first buck. For entertainment, a night out for us, my friends and I, was driving up and down Main Street, around the McDonald's parking lot and back again in an infinite circle. Or we would go party up at the pit. Some of you may know what that means. Or we would drive in trucks in the woods at night with the headlights off. The name for that is booneying, if you would like to know the name for that. I wasn't a good student. I was in trouble with my parents most of the time. I didn't have a car or a license. The closest rock concert was an hour away. And I spent hours in a polyester Burger King uniform standing on a greasy floor. I was immature, I was impatient, and I was miserable. Not everybody wanted to leave that town, but I surely did. There were some bright spots. Boys, the B-52s, my friends, and hiding in my room on Sundays, reading the New York Times magazine from cover to cover. And my high school art classroom. That room was my refuge. I could dream, draw, and escape temporarily in that room. The walls were covered with inspirational artwork. There were ample supplies readily available. There were big tables, empty tables, waiting for supporting big ideas. My art teacher, Mr. G, had a beautiful mop of curly black hair, piercing eyes, and a soft but commanding voice. He taught us skills in that room: how to paint, how to draw, how to look, color theory, how to sculpt. He cared about the details. He cared about language, about meaning, intention, effort. And he had high expectations. I still remember the D I got for a project I did based on an image from the New York Times fashion section. I just liked the image, but he made it clear that only original work would do. Towards the end of my senior year, I started to work on a life-size sculpture of a human being sitting on a stool with one leg up, leaning back, with the hands pulling at the skin, trying to escape. It was a big project, and he let me stay after school to work on it. I worked for days. I remember being in the room by myself as the sun set. I remember being in there for hours until my hands were covered with red wounds from shaping and cutting the chicken wire, and my hands were dry and cracked from the plaster-soaked sheets I used to layer the skin on this sculpture. I also remember listening to a Simon and Garfunkel album, Bookends, side A, over and over and over on an old school record player, the kind that closes up like a suitcase with a handle. And so Mr. G had a bunch of albums in his office, and he would play us music sometimes, mostly classical. But I picked this album. I don't know why. And of course, my hands are busy, right? So I can't go to the record player and flip it over. I just listen to side A on repeat. I can feel the record, the vinyl in my hand, and I can still recall the order of songs. The second song was about a boy who was about to jump to his death. And the mother cries, "Save the life of my child." And in the end, the boy flies away. Now looking back, I realize that I was that child, and I was also the mother. I wanted to escape, and I also wanted to save myself. Mr. G must have broken some rules to let me stay in that room so many hours after school. He saw me as an individual with individual needs, and he left me unattended, unmanaged in that room for hours. There were no cell phones, by the way. I was able to stay in that room. He gave me the time and the space in that room to stitch my identity together, to create, to birth myself in that room. Eventually, I managed to graduate from high school, barely, but I did. And I spent the next several years in very serious trouble. But the whole time, I always felt like something was waiting for me. I was waiting for me. This ideal version of me was there. It was like my compass, my North Star, a beacon, a buoy. And every time I got kicked off the path, I would find my way back. I had this future image of myself that I was headed towards, even though I was a mess. Eventually, I found my happy place, which was art college in Boston. And I graduated. And in the graduation ceremony, instead of wearing a cap and gown, I walked across the stage in a prom dress, balancing my journal on my head to get my diploma. I had become a self-possessed free artist. Recently, I spoke to Mr. G to let him know that I was going to tell this story. And he remembered me. We've stayed in touch a little bit over the years. But he didn't remember the details of me staying after school so many nights, of the sculpture that I was making, or the Simon and Garfunkel album. What was so memorable to me was just a day at work for a great teacher, holding expectations high, sharing his knowledge, making resources available, seeing me as an individual with unique needs, and making exceptions when necessary. Opening the door to that classroom did nothing less than save my life. Opening the door to that classroom did nothing less than save my life. It also inspired me to become a teacher myself, which I've been doing now for 30 years and counting. And I can tell you that we are in the midst of a mental health crisis for young people. It's a crisis. And while we may never know what kind of effects we have on the people that we interact with, every time we interact with a young person, it's an opportunity to open a door and give them the time and space they need to create their version of freedom for themselves. Thank you.
Our next teller began her creative life as a choreographer, founding and directing the modern dance company Hoi Polloi. She's a graduate of Hampshire College and holds an MFA from Smith. She's also the co-founder of Blind Tiger Tellers, a storytelling consultancy in the greater Boston area. She's a Moth Grand Slam champion, a Moth Made Stage storyteller, and was recently featured on the Moth Radio Hour. During the pandemic, she started a talk show with her co-host Adam called Food on the Radio on WOMR, Provincetown's community radio station. She's honored to be part of the Fugitive Storytelling family and is desperately working on her first book. She lives in Winthrop with her husband Steph and their dog Pretzel. Please welcome Sarah Sweet Rabidou Kelsey.
1988, and it's the beginning of my senior year of high school. And things are pretty great. I'm the goalie for the varsity field hockey team. I'm a senior class officer, and my grades are okay. They're good. I do fine. But I'm not one of those kids that doesn't have to study. I have to study. And I study a lot because even though we're out there in the lonesome curl of rural Cape Cod, the pressure to go to a good school and get good grades is everywhere. Like our guidance counselors' rooms, the walls are festooned with posters from Bates and Bowdoin and Brown. There's probably like UMass in there too, but they're like behind the door. And we make fun of the kids that go to the VOTEC. We call them losers and dipshits. And the most dreaded superlative in our yearbook is something called most likely to stay on Cape Cod. And believe me when I tell you, like, no one wants to, it sounds good now, but like no one wants to win this. Now, I've been spending a lot of time with my new friend, Sylvia. Well, she's not really new. She's one of those friends that you've known your entire life, in our case, 5th grade, but you've never spent any time together until this massive, magically strange event happens and brings you together and changes how you relate to one another and who you are. And in our case, that is the German exchange trip in our junior year. Something happens when we're in Germany like this. The strike of lightning hits us and we become like these desperate, debaucherous best friends. All across Germany, we do the most outrageous things I would never do like by myself or even with my other friends. We chug something called blue curacao and like try to light our breath on fire. We urinate in hotel sinks. And we go with boys to see a band called In Excess play live in a dungeon. But despite our antics and our nearly causing an international incident in Aachen, our chaperone, Mr. Chamberlain, doesn't hate us. We're like not even really in that much trouble. Like we have to sit with him now whenever we go somewhere on the bus. But he gets a kick out of us. He thinks we're funny and that we're fundamentally good kids, which is cool because Mr. Chamberlain is also the most beloved / feared teacher at our high school. His classes are legendarily difficult and everyone just wants to do their best for him. So when we begin our senior year, we are quite excited to find not only are we in his advanced biology class, but he has chosen Sylvia and myself to be his assistants. Like, we don't assist with anything like biological. We're cleaning the room and passing out the tests, but it feels pretty great. We're basically like a two-headed teacher's pet. But even still, by the end of that first term, I'm feeling pretty panicked about getting a good grade on the final exam. Like, I'm certain somehow that there isn't enough studying that I can do that would produce a good grade. Sylvia feels the same. What starts as one of those, wouldn't it be funny if conversations, quickly turns into a sinister version of the Great Muppet Caper. And Sylvia and I, together, decide there's nothing we could do. No flashcards, no book cracking. There's nothing we can do enough that will result with us getting a good grade. So we decide to cheat. And we're not gonna like write the answers on our hand kind of cheating or like peek at the test. No. We are going to leave a window open in Mr. Chamberlain's office, which we have free reign over, return to the school at night, crawl through the open window, and steal the answers to the test. Like, P.S. I can't believe this actually happened. And it's much easier than we think. His office is on the ground floor, and we are home at Sylvia's house before we know it, chugging Coca-Cola and memorizing the answer key all night long. A, B, B, C, A, D. All of this for a multiple choice exam. Be that as it may, we return to school the next day for the test. It's there on our desks in the classroom, and we take it. And I can't look at Mr. Chamberlain. I can't look at anyone else. I want to look at Sylvia because I'm like, this is awful. And we're very careful to not finish it too fast, because you want to just get the A, B, B, A, C, D. And we wait till the bell rings to hand in our tests. So we go back to school the next day in the classroom, and Mr. Chamberlain has his assistants pass the graded tests back to everyone. And we do, except there isn't one for me, and there's not one for Sylvia. And my stomach is having like an out-of-stomach experience. The bell rings, and Mr. Chamberlain says, "Oh, Sarah, Sylvia, could you stay behind?" And I know we're caught. I know it. But I'm sweating. I'm like, how? But how? There's no video cameras in 1988. There's no alarms. There's not even a janitor. But it's worse than that. He brings us back into his office, which we are quite familiar with, and there our tests are on his desk, and they each have a big fat red F on top, and every single question is marked wrong. And he says, "Girls, I'm pretty disappointed. You both did so poorly on this test." And we're like horrified with shame. And he says, "But more than disappointed, it's so strange that you would each get the exact same wrong answers on every single question. This seems odd to me." Sylvia and I are like, oh my God. And then he says, "But the thing I can't quite get over, fully understand, is that each of your very wrong same answers on the advanced biology tests are somehow magically the exact right answers for my chemistry test." And he looks sort of forlorn when he tells us, "Too bad you weren't clever enough to have stolen the right answers." The humiliation, it's indescribable. I'm going with that. We are in trouble. We are failed for the term. Mr. Chamberlain revokes the letters of recommendation he already wrote for our college application, and our parents are called. But worse than this, we are no longer his assistants. And I realize that me and Sylvia, we are the losers and the dipshits, and maybe not actually good kids after all. The rest of that year, I think I speak for Sylvia and myself when I say I feel as though each day I attend the rest of my senior year, it's like I have a scarlet letter F on my back, which is fair. So I work as hard as I can in his class for the rest of my year. Sylvia and I revert to our pre-German, like not quite friendship selves. And I just get really into advanced biology. And I finished the year with a C average, which would have been an A if I hadn't cheated. Now, I cannot tell you what it is that I did actually learn in advanced biology biologically. It's something to do with aspartame and chicken embryos. But what I can tell you that I did learn is maybe the very best lesson of all, like school, humanity, all of it. And it's that earning and having and keeping the trust and respect of your most favorite teacher is like 1,000 times more valuable than any good grade you could ever get. Thank you.
Our next storyteller is a storyteller, composer, musician, children's author, and actor. He has performed as a storyteller at festivals, schools, and libraries across the country. As a musician and composer, he has shared the stage with Taj Mahal, Gil Scott-Heron, and Coco Taylor. He has written and performed original compositions for the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater and WGBH Public Television. He's been a featured storyteller at WGBH and brought his children's Stories of the Wind to Fugitive Productions. As a nearly 40-year educator of kindergartners and first graders in Newton, his stories sometimes include lively vignettes of daily life with mischievous and innocent faces. Please welcome slacker Kemp Harris.
I taught kindergarten and first grade for 40 years. And I got really good. I mean, I was really good at just being sort of intuitive with kids. And when kids would have their drama, I had that intuitive sense as to what kind of support they needed, how much, what kind of reaction I should give. For example, if I saw a kid go down on the playground and was really hurt, and I knew that, I was there. It's like, we are there. We're going to get you to the nurse. We're going to work this out. Sometimes you would see a kid go down. Didn't look really bad, but I'd watch out of the corner of my eye, and the kid would hit the ground, and then it'd be like, get up and go back on the slide. You're like, okay, good, you're all set. Then sometimes a child would like hit the ground, and there's that moment of when they're trying to decide if they're hurt or not. So you're kind of waiting, because sometimes if you wait, it'll pass, but you wait that second, it's like, and the kid would start crying, so I would go over, and I knew there's nothing really wrong. It was more just the shock of falling. So I would be like, okay, let me just check here. You're not bleeding. That's good. And your bones are okay. But what I want you to do, I want you to rub that knee 19 times. And then I want you to come back and see me in 8 minutes, not 7, not 9, 8 minutes. And if you still feel hurt, we'll discuss it again. And it was just so much verbiage. They were like, all right. So they would walk away like 1, 2, 3, and then they would just forget, and then they were playing again. So I was good at this. I had it down. But there was this one day, my powers were gone. I don't know what happened. There was this one day I had invited a bunch of parents in, and we had like all these different tables that were set up, and there were lots of different activities going on. And my job was basically just sort of just walk around and oversee, these parents who are working with kids, and it was going great. And then right in the middle of this wonderful activity morning, this little girl, this is kindergarten. She comes up to me, and she is hysterical. She can't even get it out. She's like, I mean, it's like, she's sweating around the hairline, the tears, like snot's coming up, the whole deal. So she's like, So I said, yeah, I'm like, honey, what's wrong? Shira said she saw my doll in China. I said, I'm sorry. What? Shira said she saw my doll in China. Is your doll made of China? No. She saw my doll in China. Did you get the doll? Is the doll from China? No. No, she saw my doll in China. So, and then the parents are beginning to look over and I can't figure out. So I take her over to the corner. I said, honey, I just don't know what's wrong. Did you ever go to China? No, I did. She saw my doll in China. So I'm like, okay, so I'm like, okay, I need to get Shira over so that I can try to figure out what's going on. So this is like in the mid 80s. And if any of you remember, it's like Valley Girls were huge. I mean, it was a thing. It's like, Frank Zappa's daughter had an album, a song out, and she was like, oh, grody to the max, gag me with a spoon, oh my God. So it was like that. And Shira, even though she was only 6, was the consummate Valley girl. So, I'm like, Shira, I need to have you come over. So we kind of go over, and I'm trying to calm it all down because now everyone's kind of. So I get in the corner, I said, Shira, she's very upset. And she says that you saw her doll in China. So Shira, who was like, she's really like maybe like 16 in a child's body. She's there and she's clearly annoyed, one, that I have called her over. So she's standing there and she's like, I didn't say I saw her doll in China. I said I saw her doll's vagina. Every parent in the room was like, to see what I was gonna do. So I'm sitting there and I was thinking back to that little Jedi trick of, hey, rub your knee 15 times, whatever. Something, okay, I gotta get my Jedi mind trick back for this. So I'm standing there and without missing a beat, I looked at Shira and I looked at the little girl and I said, is that doll anatomically correct? And Shira's like, what? And the other, she's like, what? I said, is the doll anatomically correct? Because if it's not, then she doesn't even have one. There's no way Shira could have seen that. And now they're both like, oh. So they both let it go. And I said, okay, everybody back to work and we'll have snack in about 20 minutes. And they leave. Everything is good again. So I'm standing there like, Jedi's back. I look over at this parent at the table and she goes, thank you.
Kemp asked me if adult themes were okay, but I thought he was talking about children, so I didn't know what was coming. Our next teller is a storyteller, children's author, and educator who performs in schools, libraries, festivals, and conferences. Booked through young audiences, she specializes in teaching people of all ages how important their stories are. She's the founder of StoriesLive.org, the former director and co-founder of Massmouth.org, and the Boston Story Slam series. She teaches storytelling at Lesley Graduate School of Education and has taught storytelling to undergrads at Tufts, Suffolk, and Boston universities. Internationally, she has lectured on the storytelling to teachers and graduate students in Japan and Tanzania. Welcome yet another slacker, Norah Dooley.
So it seems to be a theme, but in high school, I was a mediocre student, and I brought a nice, big, thick novel to every class and hid it behind whatever book I was supposed to be studying. And I really didn't do very well, but there was one topic that I loved, and that was history. And I learned some very powerful lessons in history through my course of high school. So in 9th grade, I had a friend, and I was visiting her. She was a new friend, and I noticed that her mother had a tattoo on her arm, a tattoo of numbers. And I had no idea what that meant. I had only just moved to Brookline from New York City, where I was a Catholic school, parochial school student, and I had never heard of the Holocaust. And it was like my mind broke open, because when I heard that both of her parents had escaped the Nazi death camps in Poland, I had never heard of this kind of thing. And so I started studying it on my own. And it just like blew my mind that human beings could be this awful to each other. And I started studying as much as I could to see if I could find some counterexamples. And I was absolutely bullshit that no one had told me this and that I had not known this. But when I was in 10th grade, based on that experience, I had joined the Social Action Club. And my best friend and I, we were supporting the grape boycott. The United Farm Workers had a grape boycott and strike, and Cesar Chavez had sent the striking workers all over the country to stay with different faith communities and to tell their stories. He was being advised by Marshall Gantz, who, P.S., he also advised Barack Obama 40 years later in his bid for president. So we had in our living room this young man who was my age. I was 15. He was 15. He was a farm worker. He was organizing a union, but he was 15, and he was telling us his life. And he was talking about how he lived in a pickup truck in the cold of night, and how he worked all day for 12 hours with his family in the fields, and how he didn't have enough water or any protection from the sun. And when the planes came and spewed pesticides on the grapes, they also, without warning or protection, spewed it upon the workers. And the only time his voice broke was when he talked about the death of his older sister, who had died of leukemia at the age of 17. And that story just broke my heart right open, and also upended every story I ever had heard or been told about life, liberty, and the pursuit of justice. I mean, this was now. The Holocaust was history, bad enough as it was, but this was right now. And it opens up those kinds of stories, open up those questions that young people ask themselves, like, why aren't those things happening to me? How is it that I was not born in the 1930s in Nazi Germany? How is it that I was not born in Vietnam or a Chicana in Lower California? And it just like incredible turmoil and pain, but we turned it into action. And in my junior year, it seemed like the whole world was just like breaking apart, heart and mind. And the war in Vietnam was escalating, even as our efforts to stop it were escalating. And the struggle for Black liberation seemed to be stalled. And then students were killed. Students were killed at Kent State. I'll never forget that moment when I heard that little piece of my history, our history. Because my best friend and I, we were putting up posters that we had made to invite people to a rally against the widening of the war in Cambodia. And this English teacher came up to us and said, "Hey, did you hear the news?" And he had a kind of smirk on his face. He tapped the poster. "Some kids have been shot dead for protesting this war." And it just like blew my mind that I could actually be hurt to hold what I considered my morals and my ideals of justice. I had never really considered that. Now, our whole high school went on strike. It was an interesting time and an interesting place. We went on strike, and as we were coming back from being on strike, Black students were killed in Jackson State. They were killed in Jackson, Mississippi. They were shot in their beds. And so we joined with the Black students at our school, and we demanded that in our classrooms, we would learn accurate and inclusive history. So that when I was a senior in high school, I was able to take Black history. Because there were teachers in my school, and believe me, if you demanded it in May, and some teachers are teaching it in September, there were teachers who were committed to this kind of history. And we had Black history, Asian history, Latin American history, and philosophy as electives. And I took every single one of them. But the Black history class was amazing because that teacher had us go outside the classroom. We did not just study a book, but the book was very powerful. It was called Before the Mayflower, which started the story of Africans in this country in 1619, a number you may have heard recently, right? And he had us do projects where we would compare our life in Brookline with the nearest, mostly Black community of Roxbury next door. And so one of our first projects was to compare the First National Store on Harvard Street with the one very small grocery store in Dudley Station. And it was mind-blowing because, there was practically nothing on the shelves, and everything that was there, the prices were 2-3 times what they were in Brookline. But the second project was to go and observe the Black Panther Party's breakfast program. So a friend of mine and I decided that we wanted to see these young men who cooked food for their community. And we wanted to see for ourselves what that was about because the media villainized them. And we wanted to see what it was like to have breakfast with a side of revolutionary theory. So we went to Bromley Heath. Bromley Heath is a housing project in Roxbury. And in the basement, a basement that was just an undone basement with a little hot plate, there were 3 young men, Black Panther Party members, who were cooking for about a dozen very early elementary school students. And this was way before there were free breakfasts or free lunch or any of those things as programs. You might wonder if this was not how those things came about. But the young people were eating and the Panthers were cooking. And then all of a sudden, one of the young kids said, "Oh, look, there's a rat. And sure enough, there was a rat scampering across the pipes that were covered probably with asbestos. And another one followed it. And you could see the terror in these kids' eyes. And especially you could see the terror in the Black Panther's guys' eyes too, which we shelters girls from Brookline didn't understand. But they pulled themselves together. And they picked up a baseball bat and brooms and they got rid of the rodents. And then with incredible tenderness and kindness, they brought other little kids back together and had them finish their meal. So there's certain lessons in history that are really hard to unlearn or unsee. And those are the lessons that are so important. And I will never forget those teachers, that entire history department of Brookline High School that brought the world into our classroom so that we could bring the stories of the world into our classroom. So even though when my tightly held stories I told myself that I believed were turned into nothingness, evaporated when they connected with real lived experience of people's lives, I had some way to understand that and a way to take it into the future, which is what all teachers want you to do. To go from the classroom into the world and make it a better place. Thank you.
Though we did not know each other, I also went to Brookline High School. And I remember standing outside I remember that strike very well. So I think I'm a couple years younger, even though I don't look it. And I didn't get to share the classroom experience. Our final teller is a filmmaker, a Moth Grand Slam winning storyteller, and occasional host of the Moth Story Slams in Boston. His films have been featured at Sundance Film Festival, the New York Times, and his film Record Play was shortlisted for an Oscar. He is the host and producer of the podcast First Time, Long Time, where he tells stories about sports for people who may not like sports. Please welcome Aaron Wolf.
Thanks. So I'm in Miss Berg's 4th grade class, and I'm thrilled. Normally, I'd be terrified. I spent most of 4th grade horrified at the notion that anybody would notice me, that Sharusa Media Hashemi might punch me in the neck at all times. Tyler Ross would call me Four Eyes and make fun of my outfit, which was always sweatpants with a belt on for some reason. But this day in 4th grade, I was thrilled. I was so excited because it was going to be the day that we got to watch a space shuttle lift off. It was going to be my first space shuttle liftoff, and I was so excited. I was obsessed with the space program. Ever since my dad got a brand new VCR, he traded in our ancient Betamax for a VCR, and we watched The Right Stuff. And I'd never seen anything like The Right Stuff before. First of all, there was a booby in it, which was thrilling, and it happened really fast, and my dad couldn't cover my eyes, and I was like, space booby! And I was so into it. But also because this was the first time I'd ever seen astronauts portrayed as scientists, but also incredibly brave, wild cowboys. These were people that strapped themselves to bullets and flew into the outer space. And I wanted to be like them. I wanted to be brave and exciting and an astronaut. I wanted to be an astronaut. And up until that moment, I'd wanted to be a rabbi, so this was a bit of a change for me. But like, I wanted to be brave and exciting and brilliant, and I was timid and boring and very mediocre, and I wanted to be them. And so in 4th grade in Mrs. Berg's class, this wasn't just a space shuttle liftoff. This was something bigger. Because as she wheels in this trolley and plugs it in with the TV on it, and we all gather around, she reminds us that this time it's going to be different. This time, Krista McAuliffe, a teacher from New Hampshire, is going to be on this space shuttle. And like, she's like me. She's like you. And in this moment, we're all gathered around and we lean in and we all have this feeling of, this could be for me too. I don't have to be a mediocre rabbi. I could be an astronaut. And 72 seconds later, she blows up. And I don't honestly remember what happens next. Somebody turns off the TV and we go back to normal or something. Mr. Bratsby's, at some point, I have a memory of Mr. Bratsby's, the science teacher, come in and he sort of explains something about how these things happen. And he was number 2 on the short list. But I don't really remember much after that. What I do remember is that a few weeks later, I started getting really angry. Like really angry, almost like NASA betrayed me. Like they had promised that we were going to be elevated to some sort of level of right stuff possibilities. And then just like that, they failed us. And I think America kind of had that experience too. There were all those terrible jokes. Do you remember them? NASA meant need another 7 astronauts. And Krista McAuliffe had dandruff. That's why they could find her head and shoulders on the beach. Those were the jokes that were going around. And I think America was basically saying, fuck you to science. You promised us something great, and you took it away from us. And a few months later, I said, fuck you to science again. Because my parents adopted my baby brother, Jesse, which was like the right stuff moment. It was really cool. I was really excited. They went down to Bogota, Colombia, which was exciting and exotic, and they were brave, and they picked him up, and they brought him home, and I was excited to meet him. And then a few months after that, when he didn't sit up and when he didn't roll over and he couldn't pick his head up off of the bed, I got to meet a real life scientist. I got to meet a neurologist who explained to me how the brain works and what cerebral palsy means. And boom, went the Challenger one more time. And this time I do know exactly what happened. I got really sad, and then I got really angry. And then I started looking for an escape. And I found that escape in communist Jewish summer camp. Now, communist Jewish summer camp is different than normal camps. Normal camps, you go outside and you play archery and you do horseback riding. We sat inside in classrooms and talked a lot. We were indoor kids. And King Nerd of the Indoor Kid was my favorite kid. And if you want to picture King Nerd of the Indoor Kid, just picture the internet. That's him. Just sort of translucent skin and a bad attitude, and that was him. But I loved him. And he had a class after lunch that was called Star Wars. That was it, Star Wars. That was the name of the class. And I was like, sign me up. I want to go to Star Wars after lunch. And Star Wars was King Nerd of the Indoor Kids would show us Star Wars and then pause it every few minutes and say now here's an inconsistency in the universe of the Star Wars. And I was like, this is my God. I love this man. I wanted to be him. I loved him. I've never loved like I loved King Nerd of the Indoor Kids. And one day after class, I went up to him and sort of timidly, I was like, oh, I'm King Nerd of the Indoor Kids. I just want to let you know that I really love science fiction. And he rolled his eyes so audibly that I thought he might go blind. And he goes, Star Wars has sword fighting, talking bears with crossbows, and magic. It's fantasy. It's not science fiction. If you want science fiction, you should read Dune or Eon or Ender's Game. That's science fiction. Star Wars is for children. And he walked away from me. I was like, it's your class, dude. You keep interrupting and telling me why Luke is this Marxist hero. What is going on? But I liked him so much, and so I went home and I got as many science fiction books as I could find. And I started reading, and immediately I found this escape. Because where I had once lived on the spectrum between the right stuff and the Challenger, science fiction was perfect. It was all possibility, right? It was all these things that were about to happen. And the science fiction that I love, the ones that I think still to this day is the best science fiction, are books in which the world is exactly as you know it now, but there's like one tiny little difference that makes everything a little bit weirder or a little bit better or a little bit more exciting. And I wanted to live in those books. And I read those books incessantly. I would walk home from middle school and I'd have my nose in a book. And as I got closer and closer to my house, closer and closer to the Challenger, I would slow down and I would read a page and I'd take a step. And I'd read a page and I'd take a step. And eventually it's like I'd read a chapter and I'd walk up the last little bits of my driveway to my house. Science fiction was 100% my drug, and it was everything I needed in this world. And then it became my sex life. Because I got to high school, and there was my first girlfriend, Kate McKay, and she was very exotic, and she was older, and she was a ballet dancer, and I was very impressed by her. And she invited me over to her house, and she was like, hey, do you want to watch a movie? And I was like, yeah, I want to watch a movie. And she had a VCR in her bedroom, which was wild to me. And she was like, hey, I've got this movie called Dune. Have you ever heard of it? And I was like, I've heard of it. Dune was the one hard science fiction that I really loved, and it was really intense, and I'd read it over and over again, but I also seen the movie so many times. And she pops it in, and we're watching the movie, and in about 20 minutes into the movie, we land on the planet Giddy Prime, home of House Harkonnen, the evil bad guys in Dune. And I'm trying to be cool because she's like worldly and everything. But as we meet this character named the Mentat Piter de Vries, I recite alongside the character the Mentat's Creed. I say out loud in front of Kate McKay, it is by will alone I set my mind in motion. It is by the juice of the sap of the thoughts acquire speed. The lips acquire stay, and the stain becomes a warning. It is by will alone I set my mind in motion. And she turns to me and she says, take your clothes off. I lost my virginity because of science fiction. There was no going back to the real world. Now, here's the problem. There's a paradox in this story, and science fiction nerds love paradoxes. The paradox is the more that I dealt in the world of fantasy, the harder it became to live in the real world, which meant I became sad. Right? So I'd get sad, I'd want to escape, I'd go into this escapist world, this utopia Utopia comes from the word that means that it is of no place. There is no utopia, right? That is where the word comes from. Fantasy would exist over here. The real world would exist over there. I'd go into the fantasy world. It wouldn't happen. The fantasy wouldn't happen. The next minute, the around the corner moment of like everything would be wonderful and perfect, it never happened. And so then I'd have to go back to the real world for a moment and all the troubles over there, and I'd feel sadder and sadder and sadder, and I want to escape more, and I'd feel sadder, and blah, 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 over and over and over again. And then I became so sad that I became a video editor, which is a really sad-making job. Because you sit in a room in the dark all day long with no one around you, and you just sit in silence and watch TV, which was basically like perfect for me. And for the first part of my career, I worked in television. And one day I get this phone call from a friend who's recommended me to this guy, David Gaines. He's making a movie about the Hubble Space Telescope. And he wants to know if I'd like to go and interview to be the editor on this documentary. And I agreed to go meet David Gaines in this Koreatown restaurant in middle of Manhattan. And David's sitting across from me and he says, "Hey, so what's your experience of science?" And I go, and I tell him the story of Mrs. Berg's class, and I leave out the whole like 30-year wandering into the fantasy and escapism thing, but I just tell him about what space meant to me and what science meant to me at one time in my life, and how I have a troubled relationship with reality, but I would like to get into documentary filmmaking and documentary editing, and I would love to work on his movie. And he says, "Great, I'd love to have you on." And so I start working for him, and I sit in this tiny little room. And the first thing that you do when you're a video editor is you watch hours and hours and hours, hundreds of hours of footage. Every single and let me start again, and I was thinking about, like, every little single moment you listen to it, you watch it, and you wait for something to stand out. And David had done a lot of work on this movie already, so he had organized all of the interviews into lots of little buckets. So there was journalists, and there were science fiction nerds, and there were politicians, and then there was this bucket of scientists. This movie was about saving a space telescope, and I would not watch the interviews with the scientists. I was too afraid to watch these interviews. I knew what lied there, and what lied there was a reminder of how hard my world felt to me. I watched every single second of every single other interview, and finally it was time to watch the physicists. And the first video clip that I watched of the physicist, the guy tells us about this thing that's going on. He explains the Hubble telescope from the point of view of what Hubble, the actual physicist, discovered, which is the Hubble Constant, which is that the universe is expanding. You know the scene in Annie Hall when the kid says, "I'm depressed because the universe is expanding"? The universe is expanding, that's true. But what's actually happening, what they discovered with the space telescope, is that it's expanding faster than it ought to be expanding. We know from the Big Bang how much energy would have been created, and it exerted on the universe, and it's expanding outwards because of that energy, but it's going faster than it ought to. In fact, it's accelerating, according to this physicist. And then he says, the reason that that's happening is that there's something called dark energy. And in fact, there's so much dark energy that there's more dark energy in the universe than there is anything else in this universe. And it's everywhere, it's up there, and it's here, and it's right in front of us right now. And I'm sitting in this tiny little room in the middle of Midtown Manhattan, hyperventilating, because this has been a terrible, this is like the world is exploding all around me, and it's exploding faster than I thought it was exploding. And I watched the next interview. And this next interview, this guy describes what was something called the ultra deep field exposure, which is a thing that they did with the Hubble Space Telescope. So George W. Bush wanted to cancel the Hubble Space Telescope. He said that we had learned all the science we needed to learn from the Hubble Space Telescope. We didn't want to do it anymore. We're going to cancel this thing, right? He was a very, very intelligent man. And the head of the Space Telescope Sciences Institute, I used to know it off the top of my head. This scientist basically did a Hail Mary pass. He decided that he was going to use the space telescope, the Hubble Space Telescope, to look at a place in the universe and show us what we could actually see if we looked there. And he didn't want to look at any place in the universe. He wanted to look in the boringest spot in the universe, a place where nobody had ever observed anything ever before, right? For context, if you hold a pencil out at arm's length, the location that he was looking in the universe is roughly the size to the naked eye of the tip of the pencil held at arm's length, right? And he's explaining this to me in this dark room in Midtown Manhattan. And he says, when we got the image back after staring into this space, the boringest spot in the universe, what we found were hundreds upon thousands of galaxies. And each one of those galaxies had hundreds, millions, and billions of stars. And then he says, it is our tendency to think of ourselves as moving through space, as though space is out there and we are down here. But we are there, and it is here, and it is all of us. And then he says, very casually, that the atoms in our bodies were birthed in stars, and when we die, it will go back into stars. And in an instant, my body is just ripped out of this room in Midtown Manhattan and launched into outer space. And I look back at all of it. I look back at this planet. I look back at my life. I look back at Mrs. Berg's 4th grade class. I can see it all. And I'm weeping in this room. And I'm weeping not because it's beautiful, but because of all of the things that I had missed that were there right in front of me, all of the beauty that I had missed because I was trying to escape. And I came back and I finished working and we made the documentary and I was very proud of it. Now, it would be very, very easy if that was the end of the story and if I was able to tell you that, like, now I am perfect at doing this and I am really good at embracing the now and all of that. I am not. I am terrible at it. I am so bad at it. I escape all of the time. But I want to tell you one last little bit of a story, which is that this past weekend I was at Massmouth and I went to see the Into the Light exhibit, James Turrell exhibit. And I went with my wife and we walked through the many different galleries, and it was beautiful and strange and profound. And we get to this one gallery, which is very, very dark. It's called the Rose Something Gallery. And against one wall is this light rose-colored painting. And it's so dark that you can barely see the rose color on the wall. And my wife, Naomi, walks straight up to it. And I'm like, what are you doing? And I'm in my mind, the Challenger's about to explode. She's getting too close to it. And the world is not safe like that. You can't just go up to a painting, but she gets right up to it, inches from it. And I'm way in the background, trying to stay as far away as I can from it. I don't want to trigger any disasters, right? But what's beautiful is that I can see her framed against this rose painting, and she's beautiful. And she's framed by this color. And I want to let her know that from my vantage point, from far away, it's also very pretty. And I walk over to tell her that she should see what I see, because where I'm standing, it's beautiful. And as I get to her, I realize that it's not a painting. It's a window into a much bigger room that's painted or that's illuminated in this rose color. And that there's this giant space on the other side of the wall that's all rose and warm and beautiful. And I start sobbing. I'm not kidding. 72 hours ago, I'm standing in Massmouth sobbing, because as much as I thought that my vantage point was safe and beautiful, there was still so much more to be seen. Thank you.
So to me, that read like a movie. And I saw you as Matthew McConaughey, but I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out and being in public. I've had the good fortune to do this a lot lately. A lot of people haven't. Are there some people for whom this is the first time out in a public setting, in like a ticketed public setting tonight? Or are we all, there we go. Because less and less. A month ago, everybody was raising their hands. And now more and more people are starting to live their lives in public, because we are hopefully making it safer for people to do so. So I just wanted to thank you all for the opportunity to bring all of these great storytellers here tonight. A special round of applause for those 4 who did it for the first time. And it is my fervent hope that we get to do this again. And I will pass the baton over to Kate.
Thank you out there in your living rooms for coming. And this was probably the best one we've ever done. It was really good. Really good. And I keep thinking we can't top it, but this was really good. Really good. I cried and I laughed, and that's all we really can ask for. So thank you so much for coming. And we'll see you soon come December 2nd for our postcard show. Everybody's invited. Good night.